She pushed a cleaning cart down the hallway of a motel off I-10 at 5:47 in the morning, bleach on her hands, hair tied back under a faded cloth, her shoes leaving no sound on the concrete. He sat in the back of a black SUV, signing papers that would erase 12 properties along the same highway, each signature worth more than she would earn in a decade. Both of them, before the day began, looked at the same book. An old paperback with a broken spine, same title, same dog-eared page. The way people look at compasses when they have forgotten where they were going. Kenya had been awake since 4:23, not because of an alarm. She had stopped setting alarms after the first month at the motel because her body had decided on its own that 4:23 was the time, and her body was not interested in negotiation. It woke itself up, found the edge of the mattress with one hand, and swung her legs over before her mind had finished assembling the day. Her feet touched the linoleum, and the cold moved through her the way it always did, sharp and brief. A small daily reminder that the floor did not care whether she was ready. She dressed in the dark. Gray pants, dark shirt, both washed the night before, and hung on the back of the bathroom door to dry because the dryer in the laundry room had been broken for 2 weeks and she had stopped asking when it would be fixed. She pulled her hair back and tied it under a cloth, the way she did every morning, tight enough to stay loose enough to last 12 hours. Her hands still carried the faint smell of bleach from yesterday's shift. It lived in the skin now, in the small cracks along her knuckles, in the space beneath her nails. Something chemical and clean and permanent in the way certain smells become permanent when they are the smell of how you survive. She had stopped noticing it most days. You stopped noticing most things, if noticing them changed nothing. In the kitchen, which was not a kitchen so much as a counter and a hot plate and a small refrigerator that hummed at a pitch she could identify from anywhere in the apartment, she filled a glass from the tap and drank it standing up. On the counter near the stove, a test paper sat face down beside a pencil, not hers. The handwriting on the edge, where a name had been written, was neat and deliberate and young. Beside the door, a pair of running shoes well worn, the left sole beginning to separate at the toe. A girl's size placed side by side with a precision that suggested the person who owned them cared about small things being where they belonged. On the wall, near the kitchen window, pinned with a single thumbtack, a letter. The letterhead read Howard University, and below it a paragraph that began with the words, "We are pleased to inform you." Kenya did not look at the letter this morning. She looked at it most mornings, not this one. This morning, she moved past it the way you move past something that is both the best thing in your life and the thing most likely to break you, because the distance between "we are pleased to inform you" and the money it would take to make that letter real was a distance she had not yet figured out how to cross. She went to the supply closet at the end of the building. The cleaning cart was where she had left it the night before, parked against the wall at a precise angle, the handle pointing out so she could grip it without adjusting. She checked the cart the way she checked it every morning. Towels folded in thirds, stacked flush white on the left-hand, towels on the right. Spray bottles in the caddy labels facing out, arranged by the order she would use them. Toilet cleaner, surface spray, glass cleaner, disinfectant. Gloves draped over the handle, left glove on the left, right on the right. Each thing in its place. She did this not because anyone required it. No one had ever inspected her cart. No one had written a policy about towel folds or bottle placement. She did it because it was hers. The cart was her workspace, her desk, her station, the one domain she governed entirely, and she governed it with the specific care of someone who had learned that when very little belongs to you, what does belong to you matters in ways that are difficult to explain to people who have never had to count what they own. She pulled the cart out of the closet and into the hallway. The morning was still dark outside. The motel parking lot held 6 cars, 2 of them belonging to long-term residents who paid by the week. Somewhere across the highway, a truck geared down, and the sound traveled through the damp air, the way sounds travel in Louisiana, thick and close, as though the air itself was too heavy to let anything pass through quickly. On the shelf beside her bed, which she was now walking away from and would return to, in 12 hours, there was a book. Paperback, old the spine, cracked in 2 places, so the cover bent at wrong angles when you set it down. The bluest eye. She had owned it for 20 years. She did not read it anymore. She had read it so many times that the words existed in her without the book the way songs exist in people who have not heard them in years. She kept it on the shelf not to read it, but to see it, the way you keep a photograph of a place you once lived. Not because you are going back, because it proves you were there. She pushed the cart down the hallway toward the first room on her list. The wheels made a sound she knew by heart, a slight rattle in the front left, where the bearing had worn down a rhythm she could hear under the quiet of the morning like a second pulse. She would clean 14 rooms today. She would start with the one at the far end and work her way back. She would finish by 4 in the afternoon if nothing went wrong. And something always went wrong. A clogged drain, a guest who had not left on time, a stain that required a second pass, and she would handle it the way she handled everything, which was by handling it, not by deciding whether it was fair, not by weighing whether she deserved better, but by doing the next thing, because the next thing was there, and she knew how to do it. And knowing how to do the next thing when everything else was uncertain was not nothing. It was, in fact, the one skill nobody had been able to take from her. The staff locker room at the Pelican Ridge Motel was a converted storage closet at the back of the building, narrow lit by a single fluorescent tube that buzzed at a frequency Kenya had stopped hearing years ago, the way you stop hearing the past highway when you live beside it long enough. Her locker was the third from the left. The lock was a combination lock she had bought at a dollar store when she started, and the combination was her daughter's birthday, which was a small sentimentality she allowed herself. In a life that did not have much room for sentimentality, she opened the locker. Inside, hanging on the hook, her jacket. Below the jacket on the small shelf, her wallet, which contained her driver's license, an expired library card, and $11 in cash. Beside the wallet, an envelope. The envelope was the kind you buy in packs of 10 at the pharmacy, plain white, business-sized. And on the front of it, she had written in pencil a series of words and numbers that constituted her entire financial architecture. Electric 42, gas 28, phone 35, Simone books 15. The word Howard appeared at the bottom of the list, and beside it, a number that had been erased and rewritten so many times. The paper had thinned at that spot, almost translucent, as though the paper itself was tired of being asked to hold a free number that kept changing. This week, the number said 212. Last week, it had said 230. The week before, 190. The difference between those numbers was the difference between a drain that needed a part she had to buy herself, and a shift she picked up, and a jar of peanut butter she bought instead of the almond butter Simone preferred, and each of these adjustments was invisible to anyone who did not live inside the arithmetic, the way Kenya lived inside it, which was constantly the way you live inside weather. Behind the envelope, folded once and tucked against the back wall of the locker where she did not have to see it unless she chose to, was a piece of paper. It had arrived 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Thelma had given it to her in the office, standing behind the front desk with both hands flat on the counter. The way she stood when she was delivering news, she had already decided not to soften. The paper was a letter from Anderson Redevelopment Group. It informed the management and staff of Pelican Ridge Motel that the property had been acquired for commercial redevelopment and that operations would cease within 60 days. Kenya had read it twice. She had folded it and placed it behind the envelope, and she had not mentioned it to Simone. She had not mentioned it because she did not yet know what to say. And saying something without knowing what to say was worse than silence when the person you were speaking to was 17 and had just received the first good news of her life in the form of an acceptance letter pinned to a kitchen wall. The name on the letterhead, Anderson Redevelopment Group, meant nothing to her. It was a name the way all corporate names are, names distant and clean and belonging to someone she would never meet. She thought about Mrs. Thelma Greer, who had managed this motel for 22 years and who had hired Kenya on a Tuesday morning 9 years ago, when Kenya had arrived with an 8-year-old daughter, no resume, no previous address. She was willing to share, and no explanation for why a woman with the vocabulary she had and the way she carried herself was applying to clean motel rooms off the highway in rural Louisiana. Mrs. Thelma had not asked. She had looked at Kenya across the front desk, and she had said one sentence. "Can you start Monday?" That was all. And Kenya had said yes, and she had started Monday, and she had not missed a shift in 9 years, and Mrs. Thelma had never once asked the question that Kenya had spent the first 6 months expecting her to ask, which was, "What happened to you?" Because Mrs. Thelma was the kind of woman who understood that some questions are not yours to ask, and some answers are not yours to receive, and the best thing you can do for a person standing in front of you with nothing is to give them a place to start. Kenya closed the locker. On the inside of the door, taped at eye level, 2 things. A photograph small printed at a drugstore of a girl standing in front of this motel at 6 years old, grinning with a gap where her left front tooth had been. The parking lot behind her, the neon sign above her, the morning light, making everything look almost beautiful. Beside the photograph, the acceptance letter from Howard University, addressed to Simone Mitchell, dated 3 weeks ago. A girl with a missing tooth standing in front of a motel, and a letter that said that girl was going to college. Both of them taped to the inside of a locker that belonged to a woman who cleaned rooms for a living. Both of them completely real. That same morning, 70 miles east on I-10, Jerome Anderson was in the back of a black SUV watching Louisiana pass by outside the window. The swamp grass along the highway was winter brown and dense, and the sky sat low over everything the way Louisiana sky does in March, heavy and gray, and close enough to make you feel the weight of it on your shoulders. Darnell drove in silence. He had worked for Jerome for 4 years, and he understood that silence in the car was not an absence of communication, but a form of it, the specific communication of a man who spent his days talking to lawyers and investors and board members and needed the drive time to not talk to anyone. Jerome was looking at his iPad. On the screen, a spreadsheet. 12 properties arranged in rows, each one a line of data. Address, square footage, assessed value, acquisition cost, projected demolition cost, projected build cost, projected return. The numbers were clean, and the margins were strong, and the logic was the kind of logic that had made him worth what he was worth, which was a figure that appeared in magazines, and that he had stopped reacting to the way you stop reacting to your own face in the mirror. It was just there. It was just what it was. One of the 12 rows read, Pelican Ridge Motel, lot size 2.3 acres, 26 rooms, current occupancy 41%. Condition substandard. His team had flagged it as the easiest acquisition on the corridor. A motel past its useful life on a stretch of highway being rezoned for commercial development. Good land, bad building. Simple math. In his leather overnight bag tucked between 2 folders of contracts and a phone charger, there was a book, paperback, old, the spine broken in multiple places so it no longer closed properly. The Bluest Eye. He did not read it on business trips. He had not opened it in years. But he packed it every time he traveled the way. Some people pack a photograph or a ring or a small object that serves no practical purpose but that they cannot leave behind without feeling the specific absence of it. He could not have explained why he still carried it. He had tried once in his own mind to identify the reason, and the closest he had come was that the book belonged to a version of himself that had existed before the money, before the company, before the particular kind of success that makes it possible to sign your name and erase a building from the earth. That version of himself had sat on the front steps of a university library on autumn afternoons and read passages aloud to a girl who listened with her knees pulled up and her chin on her arms, and who argued with him about every sentence, as though sentences were things worth fighting over. He had not thought about that version of himself in a long time. He packed the book anyway. He told Darnell this trip was due diligence, final walkthrough before the demolition orders were authorized, standard procedure. And that was true. But there was another truth underneath it that he had never said to anyone, which was that Jerome always visited the properties before he demolished them. Every one. He drove to them, walked through them, stood in the parking lots, and looked at the buildings. Not out of guilt, not out of moral hesitation, out of a need to confirm that the place was what the spreadsheet said it was, which was a number, a margin, a line in a row, and not something else. He needed to see it and feel nothing, and then proceed. That was the process. He had done it 43 times in 18 years of redevelopment work, and he had never once felt anything that interfered with the math. Not once. The car turned off the highway onto a 2-lane road. A quarter-mile down, a sign appeared on the right side. Pelican Ridge Motel. The letters were painted on a board that had been repainted at least 3 times based on the layers of color visible at the peeling edges. A neon outline of a pelican sat above the name, but half the tubing had gone dark, so the bird looked as though it was missing a wing. Jerome looked at it. Darnell pulled into the lot. Jerome opened his door. The parking lot held 7 cars. That was the first thing that did not match the file. The file said occupancy was 41%, which for 26 rooms meant roughly 11 rooms occupied at any time. 7 cars on a weekday morning suggested either the file was wrong or some residents did not own cars, which meant they lived close enough to walk, or they took the bus, which meant they were not travelers passing through. They were people who stayed. Jerome noted this and moved toward the building. The motel was a 2-story L shape with exterior hallways and concrete stairs at both ends. Standard highway construction from the late 70s. The file described the structure as deteriorating, and structurally that was not wrong. The stair railings were rusted. The concrete walkways had settled unevenly. 2 of the second-floor room numbers had lost their brass digits and been replaced with numbers written in permanent marker on strips of masking tape. But the walkways were clean. That was the second thing. Not just swept, but clean. The kind of clean that came from someone getting on their hands and knees with a brush, not from a pressure washer rented once a quarter. In front of several rooms on the concrete ledge below the windows, small potted plants, not matching pots. Not a landscaping decision made by management. Different pots, different plants. A succulent in a ceramic cup. Here a small fern in a plastic container. There a flowering something in a coffee can, with the label still on. Each one placed by a different hand. Each one tended by the person behind that particular door. Jerome walked past them. He did not stop, but he saw them. And something about their variety, their smallness, the fact that they were there at all in front of rooms in a motel he had already decided to demolish, registered in a part of him that the spreadsheet had not consulted. Near the front desk, a corkboard hung on the wall under a small plastic awning. He paused in front of it. Pinned to the board were several notices. A bus schedule, a flyer for a free dental clinic in Lafayette, a handwritten sign that read, "Tutoring Room 8 Monday through Thursday, 6 to 8 p.m. all ages." And below that, in smaller letters, "Bring your homework." Jerome read the sign twice. He looked at the handwriting. Neat, deliberate, the letters of someone accustomed to being clear. He heard a voice inside the office behind the desk, an older woman speaking to someone in a tone that was unhurried and precise. The voice of authority earned through decades rather than title, the kind of voice that managed things by showing up every day and knowing where everything was. He did not see her. He moved on. He walked down the first-floor hallway toward room 14, which was the room his assistant had booked. Halfway down the hall, parked against the wall between 2 doors, a cleaning cart. He almost walked past it. Then he stopped. The cart was organized with a precision that seemed almost impossible for an object that spent its days being pushed from room to room and loaded and unloaded with used towels and cleaning products. The towels were stacked in uniform folds. The spray bottles were arranged by size labels out in a wire caddy that had been wiped clean. The gloves hung over the handle in a way that suggested they had not been tossed there, but placed. He stood in front of it for 3 seconds longer than a man looking at a cleaning cart should need to. He did not know why it affected him. It was a maid's cart. It was supplies on wheels. But it was organized the way someone organizes a workspace they take seriously. The way a person arranges a desk in an office, and the fact that this workspace was a cart in a hallway in a motel he was about to tear down, created a dissonance he had not prepared for. He moved on. Room 14. He slid the key card and pushed the door open. The room was small and plain and clean. Bed made with tight corners. Nightstand wiped. Bathroom tiles scrubbed. A faint smell of disinfectant that was not unpleasant, but specific, the smell of effort. The smell of someone having been here recently and having cared about what they left behind. On the small desk near the window, a book, paperback. He saw it from the doorway, noted it the way you note things that are present but not yet relevant, and did not walk over to read the title. He set his bag on the bed. He looked around the room. He thought about the spreadsheet. Lot size 2.3 acres. Acquisition cost. Projected return. Every number was solid. Every margin held. There was no column in the spreadsheet for potted plants on a window ledge. No row for a tutoring sign on a corkboard. No cell for the way a cleaning cart had been arranged with the kind of care that most people reserved for things far more important than spray bottles and towels. The numbers did not account for any of it. They never had. He sat on the edge of the bed in room 14 of a motel he owned on paper and was scheduled to erase, and for the first time in 43 properties, he did not feel nothing. Room 14 was the 6th room on her list that morning. She knocked twice with the back of her knuckles the way she always knocked. 2 firm strikes evenly spaced. Housekeeping. She waited 3 seconds. No answer. She pulled the master key from the retractable clip on her belt and slid it into the lock and opened the door in one motion, because she had opened this door over 1,000 times and her hands did not require her attention for it anymore. The room was not empty. A man was standing by the window with his back to the door, one hand holding a phone at his side, the other resting on the window frame. He was wearing a suit. She registered the suit first, the way you register certain things before others when your work puts you in proximity to money you do not have. The fabric, the cut across the shoulders, the way it moved when he turned. A suit that cost more than she earned in 3 months. Then he turned, and she did not see his face first. She saw his hand, the right hand, the one holding the phone. His index finger was tapping the edge of it, a light, rhythmic tap, not impatient, not nervous, just the idle motion of a mind working underneath a still exterior. And that tap hit her before his face did. It traveled through 18 years of distance and landed in a place inside her ribs that she had bricked over so long ago she had forgotten there was a room behind the wall. Then his face. Jerome saw the uniform first. Gray pants. Dark shirt, the cloth over her hair. A maid. The cleaning cart visible behind her in the hallway, arranged with the precision he had noticed an hour earlier, without knowing whose hands had arranged it. Then he saw the way she stood. Weight shifted slightly left, right shoulder a fraction higher than the left. A posture he had not seen in 18 years, but that his body recognized the way bodies recognize things. The mind has tried to file away immediately, completely, and without the courtesy of asking whether now was a good time. The silence lasted 11 seconds. He counted them later, sitting alone in that room after she was gone, reconstructing the moment. The way you reconstruct something you need to make sure was real. She did not count. She had stopped counting things related to him a long time ago. She stood in the doorway and she looked at him and she did not move. Not toward him, not away. She read him. The suit, the phone, the posture of a man who owned rooms like this one. She measured what she saw against the question that had lived in her for 18 years, which was not, "Where did you end up?" because she had known the answer to that for a long time. The question was simpler and harder. It was whether the person standing in front of her was someone she needed to protect herself from or someone she could afford to be seen by. She had not decided yet. He saw her reading him. He recognized it. The specific vigilance of someone deciding in real time how much danger they were in. He had seen it in boardrooms and in negotiations and in the faces of people whose livelihoods depended on his next sentence. But he had never seen it on this face. And seeing it there in the doorway of a motel room, he was about to demolish on the face of a woman he had once read Toni Morrison to on the steps of a library. did something to the architecture of his chest that he would not be able to describe to anyone afterward. She did not say his name. He said hers. Just that, Kenya. In a voice that did not belong to the man in the suit, or the man on the spreadsheet, or the man who signed things that made buildings disappear. In a voice that belonged to a 23-year-old boy sitting on the front steps of a university library on an October afternoon, reading a passage out loud to the girl beside him. A girl who listened with her chin on her arms and argued with every sentence as though sentences were worth fighting over. The memory arrived the way memories do when they have been locked in a room for a long time and the door is suddenly opened. Not in order, not gently, in pieces, each one sharper than the one before. He remembered the smell first. Old paper and hardwood floors and cold coffee from the machine on the second-floor landing that nobody ever cleaned. The Founders Library at Howard University, third floor. The reading room with the tall windows that faced west. So the afternoon light came through in long amber pieces that moved across the tables as the hours passed. He remembered where she sat. The chair in the far corner by the window, the one with the wobbly left leg that she claimed was the best chair in the room because nobody else wanted it. She sat with her legs crossed under her shoes-off feet, tucked beneath her like she was sitting on a porch somewhere instead of a university library. She read with her whole body, her head tilted when a passage surprised her. Her lips moved on sentences. She liked not reading aloud, just tasting the words, the way you taste something you want to remember. He remembered these things before he remembered her face, because the body stores what it loved in a different place than the mind stores what it lost. The first time he saw her was in a classroom. African American literature, fall semester junior year. The professor had asked a question about Toni Morrison, about beauty and destruction and who gets to decide what is worth looking at in a world that has already decided. Most of the class offered answers that were competent and careful and forgettable. Kenya Mitchell, sitting 3 rows back in a seat she had chosen because it was close enough to be heard and far enough to leave without being noticed, said one sentence. She said, "The most violent thing you can do to a person is convince them they are not worth seeing and then build an entire economy around their invisibility." The room went quiet, not the quiet of disagreement, the quiet of 20 people recognizing that someone had said the thing they had been circling around. Jerome, sitting 2 seats to her left, heard that sentence and understood with a clarity he would not be able to explain to anyone that he was not going to forget the person who said it. He did not speak to her that day. He spoke to her 3 days later on the library steps because she was reading the book from class and he was carrying the same book. And he sat down beside her and said, "I think you were wrong about the economy part." She looked up at him with an expression that was not offended and was not interested, and was something in between that he would later understand was her way of deciding whether a person was worth the effort of a conversation. She said, "Tell me why." He told her why. She told him why he was wrong. They argued for 40 minutes on those steps, while the October light faded and the campus moved around them. By the end of it, neither of them had changed their mind about Morrison, and both of them had changed their mind about leaving. A week later, on the same steps, evening the sky the color it gets in Washington in October when the day is letting go but not in any hurry about it, he read a passage from The Bluest Eye out loud. He mispronounced a word. She corrected him without looking up. He said it again correctly. She nodded. Then they both laughed, and the laughter was the specific kind that happens between 2 people who have discovered they can be wrong in front of each other without it costing anything. And Jerome Anderson did not hear that particular sound again for 18 years. There was a night later, deeper into whatever they were building when they sat in her room, and he told her about the internship. A real estate development firm in New York. Summer position. The kind of opportunity that did not come to people like them twice. He was excited. He talked about it the way young men talk about futures they believe they are owed, with the specific confidence of someone who has not yet learned what futures cost. Kenya listened. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "And what happens to the people you leave behind?" He did not answer. It was the first silence between them that meant something other than comfort. He took the internship. He came back in the fall. Things were different in the way things are different when one person has seen a version of the world The other has not been invited to. They continued. They read together. They argued. They held on to what they had with the grip of people who could feel it loosening but had not yet named the loosening as what it was. Then one morning in April, he went to her room. The door was open. The room was empty. Not empty the way rooms are empty when someone is coming back. Empty the way rooms are empty when someone has decided to be gone. The bed stripped. The desk cleared. The closet open and bare. No note, no message, no forwarding address. 2004, before smartphones, before social media made disappearing impossible. She had vanished the way people vanished then completely, by choosing to. He stood in that room for a long time, on the floor near the window where she used to sit and read a single object. A paperback old the spine, cracked in 2 places. The bluest eye, her copy. The one with the dog-eared page at the passage they had argued about on the steps. He picked it up. He did not know why. He knew exactly why. He put it in his bag, and he carried it out of that room, and he had carried it for 18 years through hundreds of hotel rooms and hundreds of cities and hundreds of nights where he opened his suitcase and saw it sitting between the contracts, and told himself he kept it because it was a good book, and knew that was not the reason. He was standing in room 14 of a motel off Iton in Louisiana, and the woman who had left that book on the floor of an empty dorm room 18 years ago was standing 6 feet from him in a maid's uniform with a cleaning cart behind her. And the book that had traveled with him through everything he had built and everyone he had become was in his suitcase on the bed between them. Kenya parked the cleaning cart against the wall outside the door. She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. She did not sit down. He did not invite her to sit down. He understood, without having to think about it, that inviting a woman to sit in a room she cleaned every day in a building he owned on a spreadsheet would create a dynamic that neither of them needed right now. She stood near the door. He stood near the window. The distance between them was the width of the room, which was the width of 12 feet, which was also the width of 18 years. She spoke first. "You look exactly the way I thought you would." It was not a compliment. It was an observation delivered in a voice that was level and measured and giving nothing away, the voice of a woman who had spent a long time deciding what she would say if this moment ever came, and had arrived at something precise. He said, "You don't." It was not an insult. It was the truth stated by a man who had carried an image of a 21-year-old girl in his mind for 18 years, and was now looking at a 41-year-old woman in a motel uniform and was unable to reconcile the two without saying something honest and failing to say it gracefully. She said, "No, I don't." The quiet after that was different from the 11 seconds at the door. This quiet was 2 people who had once known each other well enough to argue about sentences, standing in a room trying to decide which of the 1,000 available sentences was the right one to say next. Jerome said it. The question he had carried since 2004. Since the empty room and the open closet and the stripped bed and the book on the floor. "Why did you leave?" Kenya looked at him. Then she looked around the room, room 14. The room she cleaned every morning. She knew the crack in the ceiling above the bed. She knew the stain on the carpet near the bathroom door that would not come out no matter what product she used. She knew the exact angle at which the curtain rod sagged on the left side. She knew this room the way you know, a place you have tended daily for 9 years, which is to say, completely physically, without affection, but with a kind of intimacy that comes from repetition. And now the man she had once loved was standing in it wearing a suit that cost more than her quarterly rent, asking her the question she owed him and did not owe him simultaneously. She said, "I will answer that. But first I need to know why you are here," he told her. He said he was here on a real estate matter. A site visit, due diligence for a development project along the I-10 corridor. He did not say which property. He did not say the name of his company. He did not say the word demolition. Kenya did not ask. She did not need to. The letter in her locker behind the envelope folded once and tucked against the back wall where she did not have to look at it. Anderson Redevelopment Group. She had read that name 3 weeks ago, and she had known. Not that he would come, but whose name it was. She had known for 3 weeks that the man who was going to tear down the building she had lived and worked in for 9 years was the same man she had left in an empty dorm room in 2004. She had known, and she had folded the paper and put it behind the envelope and gone to work the next morning and cleaned room 14 the way she cleaned it every morning. Because what else was there to do? She began with her mother. My mother had a stroke the week before finals, junior year. She said it flat, without inflection, the way a person says something they have told themselves so many times. It has lost its texture and become just a fact, just a date on a calendar, just the thing that happened before everything else happened. She told him she left school. She told him there was no one else. Her mother could not walk, could not feed herself, could not be left alone. There was no insurance that covered what needed covering. There was Medicaid, but Medicaid did not cover the gap between what her mother needed and what the system decided her mother deserved, and that gap was filled by Kenya being present physically every day in a small apartment in Baton Rouge, feeding and bathing and lifting and sitting and waiting. She told him about the money, about how fast it went, about the arithmetic of caregiving, which is a kind of math that does not appear in any textbook and that operates on the principle that every dollar you spend keeping someone alive is a dollar you cannot spend keeping yourself viable, and the equation does not balance, and it is not supposed to balance, and you do it anyway, because the person on the other end of the equation is your mother. She stopped. The room was quiet, outside. A truck downshifted on the highway, and the sound passed through the walls, the way highway sounds pass through motel walls, which is to say, easily, because motel walls are not built to keep the world out. They are built to be temporary, and the world knows it. She said I was pregnant. 3 words. Short sentence. Standing alone. Jerome's body responded before his mind did. He sat down on the edge of the bed. Not a collapse. Not a dramatic gesture. Just the specific thing that happens when information arrives that is too heavy to receive while standing, and the body makes the decision for you the way bodies make decisions when the mind is still trying to catch up with what it has just been told. She watched him sit. She recognized the sitting. It was the sitting of a man whose legs had decided they were finished with the pretense of stability, and she had seen this before in other contexts in hospital waiting rooms, in offices where bad news was delivered, in all the places where people received information that rearranged the architecture of their lives in a single sentence. She continued. She told him. She did not tell him, because telling him would have required him to choose between the internship and a girl with no degree, no money, a paralyzed mother, and a baby coming. She said, "You had the internship. You had the future. I had a mother who could not feed herself, and a baby coming, and no degree, and no money. What was I going to say? Come back and be poor with me?" It was not drama. It was arithmetic. The specific, merciless arithmetic of poverty, where the variables are time and money and dignity, and the answer is always a subtraction. She had subtracted herself from his life, because adding herself to it would have subtracted his future. And she had loved him enough to do the math and accept the result, even though the result meant disappearing. She told him about the baby. She did not describe the birth, or the fear, or the loneliness, or the specific terror of being 21 years old and alone in a hospital room in Baton Rouge with no one to call. She described the baby the way she described everything, through objects and facts. She walked at 10 months. She read at 4. She has your habit of tapping her index finger on things when she is thinking. She got into Howard on a partial scholarship 3 weeks ago. She does not know who you are. Jerome sat on the edge of the bed. He was doing math. 18 years. Junior year. The spring she disappeared. The timing, he said. She is 17, Kenya said. She will be 18 in September. The room was quiet. Jerome sat on the bed in room 14 of a motel he was scheduled to demolish, and he thought about a 17-year-old girl he did not know existed, who was about to attend the university where he had once sat on the library steps and read aloud to her mother. A girl who had grown up here, in this motel, In a room down the hallway from this one in the parking lot, outside this window on the stretch of highway visible through the glass. A girl whose entire life had been lived inside a building that existed on his spreadsheet as a line of data, a margin, a number, a property to be erased. And he was the one who was going to erase it. Jerome did not speak for a long time. He sat on the edge of the bed in room 14, and he looked at the room. He had looked at it when he checked in and seen a motel room, a line on a spreadsheet, a structure scheduled for removal. He looked at it now and saw something else. The ceiling was clean. Not just free of stains, but actually clean, scrubbed, the kind of clean that required a person to stand on a chair and reach up with a cloth and work at it. The pillows were folded with a precision that he now understood was not institutional. It was personal. Someone had folded those pillows this morning with hands that cared about the folding. The desk where he had set his bag was polished. Not with furniture spray from a can, but with something applied and worked in and wiped until the wood had a warmth to it that old motel furniture was not supposed to have. He was sitting inside the result of 18 years of her labor. Every surface in this room had been touched by her hands, maintained by her effort, kept alive by her decision to show up every morning at 4:23 and do the work. And he had come here to erase it. He had driven 70 miles with a spreadsheet on his iPad, and a signature ready, and a number in a column that represented the projected return on demolishing this building, and the building contained the life she had built when he was not there to build it with her. He was not a villain. He understood this in the specific way you understand things that are true but not comforting. He had not known about the baby. He had not known she was pregnant. He had not chosen to abandon a child because there had been no child in his knowledge to abandon. But he had chosen. He had chosen the internship. He had chosen New York. He had chosen the trajectory that led to the company and the money and the car and the suit and the spreadsheet. And every one of those choices had been made in the direction of away from the steps of the library, away from the girl who argued about sentences, away from the version of himself that might have noticed she was gone and might have looked harder and might have found her if finding her had mattered more than the next deal, the next property, the next margin. He had not been prevented from being present. He had been elsewhere. And elsewhere, compounded over 18 years, was the distance between a man in a suit on a bed and a woman in a uniform at a door and a daughter he did not know existed, learning to ride a bicycle in a parking lot. He asked one question, not why, not how. Not the question of a man gathering facts for a decision. The question of a man who had just understood that the thing he missed could not be retrieved and who needed to know its shape so he could carry it properly. He said, "What did I miss?" Kenya looked at him. She had expected several questions. She had prepared for accusations for disbelief, for the specific calculations of a man assessing liability. She had not prepared for that one. She did not answer with a list. She did not describe 17 years of birthdays and first days of school and parent-teacher conferences attended alone, and nights spent awake with a sick child, and mornings spent doing math on an envelope to determine whether there was enough for groceries and electricity in the same week. She answered with one image. She said, "She learned to ride a bicycle in the parking lot of this motel." Mrs. Thelma held the back of the seat. That was all, one sentence, one image. A girl learning to balance on two wheels in the parking lot of a motel off the highway, and the person holding the seat was not her father. It was a 60-year-old woman who managed the front desk. Jerome's face did something. It was not crying in the way the word is usually meant. It was something that moved across his features, that was not composure, and was not performance, and was not anything he had shown another human being in the 20 years since he had learned to show only the version of himself that closed deals and signed papers and made buildings disappear. It was the thing underneath all of that, the thing he had built everything on top of. Kenya watched it. She did not move toward him. She did not offer comfort or touch his arm, or say the things people say when they want someone's pain to be smaller, so they can feel less uncomfortable standing near it. She stood where she was, not out of coldness, out of the specific knowledge that comes from having cried alone enough times to understand that sometimes the most decent thing you can do for a person in pain is to let them have it without interference. That afternoon, Simone Mitchell came home from school, the way she came home every day, which was by pushing the front door of their small apartment behind the motel office open with her shoulder because her hands were full. Backpack in the right hand, a library book in the left, keys already back in her pocket because she had learned to put them away immediately after unlocking the door so she would not spend 20 minutes looking for them later. She dropped the backpack on the chair in the corner, not randomly, in the exact spot she always dropped it, which was the left side of the chair angled so the strap hung over the armrest and the bag did not slide to the floor. She went to the refrigerator, opened it, looked, closed it, opened it again because hunger was more persuasive than preference. She took out a container of leftover rice and ate it cold, standing at the counter, the way her mother ate most things, standing quickly, between one task and the next. She sat at the kitchen table. On the table, 3 things. A notebook open with handwriting that was neat and forward-leaning and deliberate. A pen the cap chewed at the edges, the specific damage of a person who bit down when they were thinking, which was a habit she had always had and did not know where it came from and had never thought to ask. And a book. Paperback new, the spine still intact. The bluest eye. Her mother had given it to her 3 months ago when she got the acceptance letter. She had said, "Read this before you go. Write your essay about it if you want." Simone had asked if she could borrow her mother's copy, the old one, with the broken spine that sat on the shelf by the bed, and her mother had said no. She had said it gently but firmly, the way she said things that were not open to negotiation. She had said, "That one is mine. This one is yours." Simone had not understood why her mother would buy a new copy of a book she already owned, but she had accepted it the way she accepted most things about her mother, which was with the understanding that there were rooms in her mother's life she had not been invited into, and that the doors to those rooms were closed for reasons that would become clear when they became clear, and not before. She was writing her essay for Howard. The prompt asked her to describe someone who had shaped her understanding of the world. She was writing about her mother, not about the cleaning or the long hours or the tired hands or any of the things that people on the outside saw when they looked at Kenya Mitchell. She was writing about the tutoring, about room 8, about Monday through Thursday 6 to 8, all ages, bring your homework, about what it meant to watch your mother finish a 12-hour shift cleaning other people's rooms and then walk down the hallway and open a door and become a teacher for 2 hours because she believed that the children of motel workers and highway residents deserved someone who sat with them and made sure they understood the assignment. Kenya came home at 5:30. Simone heard her at the door and did not look up immediately. She heard the sound of her mother's shoes coming off, the jacket going on the hook, the specific sequence of arrival that had been the same for as long as Simone could remember. Kenya came into the kitchen. Simone looked up. Something was different. She could not have identified it specifically. It was in her mother's posture, in the way she stood in the doorway for a half-second longer than usual, before moving to the counter, in something around her eyes that was present and not present simultaneously. Simone said, "Were you okay today? You seem different," Kenya said, long shift. It was not a lie. It was not the truth. It was the space between them that mothers occupy when the truth is too large to fit through the door, and the lie is too small to be convincing, and the only option is something in between that is technically accurate and emotionally incomplete. Simone accepted it. She said, "I am writing my essay, the Howard one." Kenya turned from the counter. Simone said, "I am writing about you, about what you built here, the tutoring, everything." Kenya's hand stopped moving. She was holding a glass under the tap, and her hand stopped and the water ran over the edge, and she did not correct it for 3 seconds. She said, "That is a good topic." She did not say what she was thinking, which was that the motel was scheduled to close in 53 days, and that everything Simone was writing about was on a piece of paper in a locker that said it would cease to exist and that the man responsible for that piece of paper was sitting in room 14 with a suitcase that contained a copy of the same book that was open on the kitchen table right now. She turned off the tap. She dried the glass. She made dinner from what was in the refrigerator, which was rice and canned beans, and the last of the hot sauce, and they ate together at the table with Simone's essay between them. Simone went to bed at 10. Kenya sat at the table alone. In front of her, the new copy of The Bluest Eye opened to the page Simone had been reading. She thought about the old copy in her locker at work, the one with the broken spine and the dog-eared page, the one she had kept for 20 years. She thought about the man in room 14 who carried a third copy of the same book in his suitcase across every city he visited. 3 books, 3 lives. The same story read differently by each of them, carried differently, meaning different things at different times. But never put down. Never discarded. Never finished. Room 8 was at the far end of the first-floor hallway, past the ice machine that worked only half the time, past the storage closet where Kenya kept her cleaning supplies, past the vending machine with the cracked glass panel that Mrs. Thelma had covered with a piece of cardboard and tape, because the repair company charged $200 for a service call, and $200 was 2 weeks of towel replacement budget. Room 8 had been vacant for 3 years. Not because it was damaged, but because the plumbing in the bathroom had a slow leak that would have cost $1,500 to fix, and $1,500 was a number that did not exist in the maintenance budget of a motel, where the nightly rate was $49, and the average guest stayed for 6 nights and paid in cash. Mrs. Thelma had closed the room to guests and told Kenya she could use it. She had not said for what. She had not needed to. Kenya had started with a folding table from a church donation bin and 2 metal chairs from the storage closet. The first night, 1 child showed up. The daughter of the woman who worked the front desk on weekends, a 9-year-old who could not read at grade level and whose school had placed her in a remedial group that met twice a week for 30 minutes, which was not enough time to teach a child anything except that the system had already decided she was not worth more than 30 minutes. Kenya sat with her for 2 hours. They read a picture book together. Then they read it again. By the 3rd reading, the girl was sounding out words she had not been able to sound out at the start, and Kenya understood that the problem had never been the child. The problem had been the 30 minutes. Word spread the way word spreads in small communities. Not through announcements or flyers, but through one mother telling another mother at the laundromat, or the bus stop, or the parking lot, that there was a woman at the Pelican Ridge Motel who would sit with your kid and help them with their homework, and she did not charge anything, and she did not ask questions about where you lived, or what you did, or why your child was behind. Within 6 months, Kenya had 5 regulars. Within a year, 8. She bought a small whiteboard at Goodwill for $4. She collected donated textbooks from the public library's discard bin. She kept a box of pencils on the table sharpened because she had learned that children who did not bring pencils to school were not children who did not care about school. They were children whose households did not have pencils. And the difference between those 2 things was the difference between a child who gets helped and a child who gets labeled. One of her students, a boy named Devin, who was 16 and had dropped out the year before, came to room 8 3 nights a week for 7 months. Kenya helped him prepare for the GED. He passed on his first attempt. He enrolled in community college the following semester. He came back to room 8 on his first day of classes and stood in the doorway and said, "I just wanted you to know." That was all. Kenya had nodded and said, "Good. Now go." Another student, a girl named Iris 14, had been told by her school counselor that college was probably not realistic given her circumstances. Kenya did not respond to this information by contacting the school or filing a complaint or doing any of the things that people with resources do when the system fails their children. She responded by sitting with Iris every Tuesday and Thursday and going through the coursework until Iris understood it, and then going through it again until Iris believed she understood it. Because understanding something and believing you understand it are not the same thing when you are 14 years old and an adult with a title has told you that your circumstances determine your ceiling. Mrs. Thelma Greer stood in the doorway of room 8 every evening. She did not come inside. She stood in the doorway with her arms at her sides and watched. She had managed Pelican Ridge for 22 years. She had seen people come and go, travelers, drifters, families between houses, women leaving situations they could not name, and men looking for work that did not exist, and children who understood nothing about why they lived, where they lived, except that it was where they lived. She had decided a long time ago that if this was the place people ended up when they had nowhere else to go, then this place was going to be worth ending up in. She could not fix the plumbing in room 8, but she could give the room to a woman who would fill it with something the plumbing could not provide. She stood in the doorway, and she watched Kenya teach, and she said nothing because there was nothing to say. The work spoke for itself. It spoke in pencil marks on worksheets, and in test scores that moved upward, and in a boy named Devin who passed his GED, and in a girl named Iris who was going to apply to community college this fall, despite what a counselor had told her about ceilings. All of this existed in room 8 of a motel that appeared on the files of Anderson Redevelopment Group as a property marked for demolition. There was no line item in those files for room 8. There was no column for a whiteboard purchased at Goodwill for $4. There was no cell in any spreadsheet for the number of children who had learned to believe they could learn in a room at the end of a hallway past a broken ice machine in a building the world had already decided was not worth keeping. Jerome woke in room 14 the following morning to the sound of the highway and the hum of the air conditioning unit that rattled in its housing. The way old machines rattle when they have been running longer than they were designed to run. He lay still for a moment. The ceiling above him was clean. He had noticed this yesterday, but had not thought about it. He thought about it now. He thought about whose hands had cleaned it. He sat up and called Darnell. He said, "I need the full acquisition file on Pelican Ridge, not the summary, the full file. Staff records, tenant correspondence, municipal filings, everything." Darnell brought it within the hour. Jerome sat on the bed and opened the folder and began to read. He had read this file before. He had read it on the drive down on his iPad in the format his team prepared for every acquisition, which was clean and numerical and organized for the specific purpose of making a decision efficient. He had read the numbers. He had not read the rest. He read it now. The staff list, 6 employees. He found her name on the 3rd line, Kenya Mitchell, position housekeeping. Start date 9 years ago. 9 years. He looked at that number and thought about what it meant. 9 years of mornings at 4:23. 9 years of cleaning cart organization. 9 years of room 14. He turned the page. There was a section of correspondence he had never opened. Letters from the motel management to his company's legal department. 3 letters over 2 years, all from the same sender. Thelma Greer, General Manager, Pelican Ridge Motel. The first letter requested a meeting to discuss the timeline. The second letter requested an extension of operations, citing ongoing community obligations. The third letter was more specific. It described a tutoring program operating in room 8 of the motel Monday through Thursday 6 to 8 in the evening, serving children of motel staff and residents of the surrounding area. It described a young man who had earned his GED through the program. It described a girl who was preparing to apply to community college. It requested that the demolition timeline be reconsidered to allow the program to continue while alternative space was identified. Jerome looked at the response his legal department had sent. It was a template. 3 sentences. "We appreciate your concern regarding the community programs at the Pelican Ridge property. However, the development timeline has been established in accordance with our acquisition agreement and municipal approvals. We are unable to accommodate schedule modifications at this time." He read that email 3 times. He recognized the voice. It was the voice of his company. It was polished and precise and empty in the specific way that corporate language is empty when it is designed to close a conversation without appearing to close it. It was the voice that spoke to people it did not see. It was his voice. He had not written the email. He had not read Mrs. Thelma Greer's letter. He had not known about the tutoring program, or the boy who passed his GED, or the girl applying to college. But the email had been sent from his company under his authority, bearing his name in the letterhead, and the fact that he had not personally written it did not make it less his. He stood up. He walked outside. The morning was warm and overcast, and the parking lot smelled like wet asphalt and grass from the field across the road. He walked the hallway slowly. He looked at the potted plants outside the rooms. He looked at the corkboard by the front desk. The tutoring sign was still there. Bring your homework. He heard a child somewhere in the building, laughing, and a woman's voice responding in Spanish, patient and warm and ordinary. He saw the cleaning cart parked outside a room midway down the hall. It was arranged the way it was always arranged, with the towels and the bottles and the gloves placed with the specific precision he had noticed on his first walk and had not been able to forget. She was inside that room right now, cleaning it the way she had cleaned it every morning for 9 years. And his company had sent a template email in response to the only person who had asked them to look at what they were about to destroy. He went back to room 14. He looked at the book on the desk. The copy Kenya had placed there for guests. The Bluest Eye. He picked it up and turned it over in his hands. She had placed this book in every room she cleaned. She had put a novel about the violence of not being seen in every room of a motel that his company had decided was not worth seeing. He opened his suitcase. He took out the old copy with the broken spine. He set them side by side on the desk. 2 copies of the same book. One carried for 18 years across hundreds of cities by a man who could not let go of what it represented. One placed in a motel room by a woman who believed the people passing through deserved to encounter it. He picked up his phone. He called his development director. He said, "I need a full pause on Pelican Ridge. No demolition. No timeline. I need to see it again." The voice on the other end asked him to clarify. He said, "I am clarifying. Full pause. No exceptions. I will explain when I am ready to explain." He hung up. His voice had been different on that call. Not the voice that made decisions in seconds and moved forward without hesitation. The voice of a man who had just realized he had been looking at something for months and had not seen it, and who was not yet certain what seeing it was going to require of him, but who understood that proceeding as though he had not seen it was no longer an option. He found her at the end of her shift. She was pushing the cart back toward the supply closet, moving with the specific pace of a body that had been working for 11 hours and was operating now on the residual momentum of routine rather than energy. He fell into step beside her. He did not ask her to stop. He did not suggest they go somewhere to talk. He walked beside her down the hallway while she pushed the cart, and the two of them moved together at the pace she set, which was the pace of a woman finishing her work, not the pace of a man who wanted something from her. He said, "I paused the demolition." She did not stop. She did not look at him. She continued pushing the cart, and the front left wheel made its familiar rattle, and she said nothing. He understood the silence. He had spent his career around people who responded to announcements with enthusiasm or concern or strategic repositioning. Kenya responded with nothing, and the nothing told him everything, which was that she had heard the word pause before, and it had never meant what the person saying it wanted her to believe it meant. Pause was not cancel. Pause was the language of people with power, buying themselves time to feel better about a decision they had already made. He said, "I am not telling you this to impress you. I am telling you because I need you to know that I am looking at what I was about to do." Kenya stopped the cart. She turned and looked at him. Her hands were still on the handle. Her gloves were off, tucked into her back pocket, and her bare hands on the metal bar were dry and cracked at the knuckles from 9 years of cleaning products. She said, "You are looking at a motel. I have been living inside it for 9 years. Those are not the same thing." He heard it. The distance between those two positions. Looking at something and living inside it. He could stand in the hallway and see the potted plants and be moved by them. She had watered them every morning for 9 years. He could read Mrs. Thelma's letter and feel the weight of the template response. She had watched Mrs. Thelma write those letters at the front desk and mail them, and wait and receive the response, and fold it, and put it in a drawer, and go back to work. He could look at the tutoring sign and understand what it represented. She had sat in room 8 4 nights a week for years and done the actual work of teaching children whose names he would never know. Looking at something and living inside it were not the same thing, and no amount of pausing a demolition order was going to close that gap. She said, "What are you going to do with what you know now?" The question was not about the motel. It was not about the spreadsheet or the timeline or the legal framework. It was about him, about who he was when the information changed, and the comfortable distance between himself and the consequences of his decisions collapsed. About what kind of man stood in a hallway of a motel he owned and looked at the woman he had once loved and the life she had built without him and the daughter he did not know and chose to do the right thing even when the right thing had no column in any spreadsheet, and no projected return, and no clean margin. He did not answer. He stood in the hallway with the cleaning cart between them, and for the first time in a career built on decisive action, he had no answer, because the question was not the kind that could be answered with a decision. It was the kind that could only be answered with what he did next. The following afternoon, Kenya told Jerome that Simone would be bringing extra towels to his room. She told him this in the hallway, standing by her cart, in a voice that was flat and specific. She said, "She does not know who you are, and you do not get to tell her until I decide it is time. She is going to bring you towels. You are going to be a guest. That is all." He nodded. He did not argue. He understood that this was not a negotiation. This was Kenya establishing the terms under which he was permitted to be in the same room as his daughter, and the terms were hers to establish because she had been the one in the room for 17 years. Simone knocked on the door of room 14 at 4:15 in the afternoon. Jerome opened it. She was standing in the hallway with a stack of folded towels balanced on one arm and her phone in the other hand. And she looked up at him with the automatic politeness of a teenager who had grown up in a motel and understood that guests were the reason the building existed and therefore deserved a certain standard of courtesy. She said, "My mom said you needed extra towels." He said, "Thank you." She stepped inside to set them on the bathroom counter, and in that motion, in the 3 seconds it took her to cross the room and place the towels on the counter and turn back toward the door. He saw everything. He saw her face, which was Kenya's face, the same cheekbones, the same angle of the jaw, the same way the mouth sat when it was not smiling. And then she smiled, and the smile was crooked, pulling slightly higher on the left side than the right, and that was his. That specific asymmetry belonged to him. He had seen it in every mirror for 42 years, and he was seeing it now on the face of a 17-year-old girl holding a stack of towels in a motel room. She stood by the door waiting for him to take the towels from the counter, or dismiss her, or whatever guests did. She was patient in the way of someone accustomed to waiting for other people to finish. Her right hand was resting on the doorframe, and her index finger was tapping lightly against the wood, a quiet, rhythmic motion, unconscious, the specific gesture of a mind running underneath a still surface. Jerome looked at that tapping finger and had to look away. He looked at the wall. He looked at the window. He looked at anything that was not his own habit alive and moving on the hand of a girl who did not know where she had gotten it. Simone said, "Are you staying long?" He said, "A few days. Maybe longer," she said, cool. "If you need anything, the office is at the end of the building. Mrs. Thelma is usually there." She paused. Her eyes moved to the desk. The 2 books were still sitting side by side where he had left them. The old copy with the broken spine and the newer copy Kenya placed for guests. Simone tilted her head. She said, "That is the bluest eye. The old one." She pointed at the broken-spined copy. "My mom has that exact same edition. Same cover. Where did you get yours?" Jerome looked at the book. He looked at Simone. He was aware of standing in a room with his daughter for the first time in his life and being asked a question that had an answer he could not give and that she would not understand even if he could. He said, "Someone gave it to me a long time ago. Someone I should have held on to." Simone considered this the way 17-year-olds consider things adults say that sound like they mean more than the words themselves, which is to say briefly. with mild interest, but without the weight that the speaker intended, because 17-year-olds have not yet accumulated enough loss to recognize it in other people's sentences. She said, "Well, it is a good book. I am reading it right now, for my college essay." He asked what she was writing about. She said, "About my mom. About what it means to build something in a place no one thinks is worth building in." Jerome heard that sentence, and something inside him recognized it as the answer to a question he had not known he was asking. He said, "That sounds like a strong essay." She said, "I hope so. Howard is my first choice." She smiled again, the crooked smile, his smile, and she said, "Okay, enjoy your stay." And she walked out of room 14 and closed the door behind her. Jerome stood in the room. He looked at the closed door. He thought about what had just happened, which was that his daughter had walked into a motel room and brought him towels and talked about Toni Morrison and told him about her college essay and tapped her finger on the door frame exactly the way he tapped his finger on the edge of his phone and smiled his own smile back at him, and then left. She had walked out carrying a stack of clean towels her mother had folded, and she did not know that the man she had just spoken to was the reason she existed and also the reason she had grown up without a father. And those two things were the same man, and that man was standing alone in room 14, looking at two copies of the same book and understanding for the first time in his life that the most important thing he had ever been part of creating was a girl who brought towels to strangers and wrote essays about her mother and was about to go to the university where her parents had once argued about sentences on the library steps, and she did not know any of it. And the closed door between them was 12 feet of motel hallway and 17 years of absence, and entirely his to account for. Jerome called his legal team that morning, not from the SUV, not from a conference room, from the plastic chair outside the motel office where the vending machine hummed behind him and a child's bicycle leaned against the railing 2 doors down. He told them to cancel the demolition of Pelican Ridge permanently. Not pause, cancel. He told them he wanted the property transferred to a community land trust, which is a legal structure designed to hold land for the benefit of the people who live on it, removing it permanently from the speculative market so that no developer, including himself, could ever acquire it again and turn it into something the community did not need. The irony of a real estate developer using the one legal mechanism specifically built to prevent real estate developers from doing what real estate developers do was not lost on him. He did not comment on it. He simply signed the papers when they arrived. He walked to the front desk. Mrs. Thelma Greer was standing behind the counter the way she had been standing behind that counter for 22 years, with both hands flat on the surface and her posture straight, and her eyes on whoever was in front of her with the complete attention of a woman who had never once in her professional life pretended someone was not there. She was small and white-haired, and she carried herself with the specific uprightness of a person who had never had much, and had never let that be a reason to carry herself as though she deserved less than anyone else in the room. Jerome stood on the other side of the counter. He said, "Mrs. Greer, my name is Jerome Anderson." She said, "I know who you are. Your name is on the letterhead." He nodded. She looked at him the way she looked at everyone, which was directly and without adjustment for status or wealth or the particular suit a person happened to be wearing. She said, "I sent your company 3 letters about the tutoring program. I received 1 email back. It said the timeline remains unchanged." Jerome said, "I know. I read it this morning. I should have read it 3 months ago." Mrs. Thelma looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You should have, but you are here now. That is something." It was not absolution. It was not warmth. It was the specific acknowledgement of a woman who had spent her life dealing with people who showed up late, and who had learned to distinguish between the ones who showed up late because they did not care, and the ones who showed up late because they had not known where to go until they finally looked. He found Kenya in the hallway afterward. She was between rooms, cart-parked gloves on the day's work half done. He stood in front of her and he said what he had come to say. He said, "I am not going to tell Simone anything. Not until you are ready. This is your decision. She is your daughter. She has always been your daughter. I was not here for that, and I do not get to walk in now and rearrange what you built." Kenya looked at him. For the first time in 2 days, something in her face shifted. It was not softening. It was not forgiveness. It was closer to recognition. The specific expression of a person who is watching someone try to do the right thing and who can see that the trying is real, even if the outcome is not yet clear. She had watched people perform generosity before. She had watched people with money arrive at places like this and offer help that was really about making themselves feel better about a situation that made them uncomfortable. This was not that. This was a man stepping backward instead of forward, giving ground instead of taking it. Ceding control of a situation he could easily have dominated because he understood that dominance was not what was needed, and that the most responsible thing he could do in this moment was to make himself smaller so that the people who had been here all along could remain the right size. She said, "I will tell her. In my own time. In my own way." She paused. She looked at him with the full weight of 18 years of doing everything alone. She said, "And when I do, you will need to be the kind of man she deserves to meet. Not the man on the business card, the man who sat on the edge of that bed in room 14 and could not move." Jerome left the following morning. Before he went, he did one thing. He went to room 14. He opened his suitcase and took out the old copy of The Bluest Eye, the one with the broken spine, and the dog-eared page, the one he had picked up off the floor of an empty dorm room 18 years ago and carried through every city and date, every hotel, and every version of himself that had come after. He set it on the desk beside the newer copy Kenya had placed there for guests. 2 books, side by side, the same title. One carried by a man who could not let go. One placed by a woman who wanted strangers to see what she had seen. He looked at them for a moment. Then he closed the door and walked to the car where Darnell was waiting. Kenya came to clean room 14 30 minutes later. She opened the door with her master key and pushed her cart inside and began the routine she had performed in this room over 1,000 times. She stripped the bed. She wiped the bathroom. She cleaned the mirror. She was wiping the desk when she saw it. The old book. She picked it up. The spine cracked in 2 places. The cover bent at the same wrong angles she remembered. She opened it to the dog-eared page. The same page. The passage they had argued about on the steps of the library at Howard 20 years ago. He had kept it. He had kept it for 18 years. He had carried it through everything he had built and everything he had become, and he had not thrown it away, and he had not replaced it, and he had left it here in room 14. On the desk she cleaned every morning like a compass pointing back to the place where both of them had started. She stood in the room holding the book, and she allowed herself for the first time in a very long time to think that perhaps some things do not disappear. Perhaps they just take the long way around. She finished cleaning the room. She put the old book in the pocket of her jacket. She would bring it home. She would put it on the shelf beside her bed where it had lived for 20 years before she had placed it in her locker, and it would be there again, and it would mean something different now than it had meant before, and that was enough. Simone was at the kitchen table when Kenya came home. She looked up from her essay and said, "Who was that guy? The one in room 14. I saw him leaving this morning." Kenya looked at her daughter. She looked at the crooked smile. She looked at the finger tapping on the cover of The Bluest Eye, the new copy, the one Kenya had bought her because the old one was too sacred to lend. She said, "Someone I knew a long time ago." Simone waited. Kenya said, "You will meet him properly soon." Simone accepted this, the way she accepted things about her mother, with the understanding that the doors would open when they opened. She went back to her essay. Outside Pelican Ridge Motel sat in the Louisiana afternoon the way it had sat for decades, low and plain and unremarkable to anyone driving past on the highway. The neon sign flickered, still missing half its letters, the Pelican still missing a wing. Mrs. Thelma stood behind the front desk with both hands flat on the counter. A child ran down the hallway and a mother called after him. The cleaning cart was parked outside the next room on the list, towels stacked bottles arranged, gloves draped over the handle. The motel was still here, not because someone had saved it, because the people inside it had never stopped holding it together. Some families begin in the light, in hospitals and living rooms and places where everyone can see. Others begin in hallways and parking lots and rooms that the world has already decided are not worth noticing. Mrs. Thelma Greer managed a motel for 22 years, and in that time she held the back of a bicycle seat in a parking lot so a girl could learn to balance. She gave a room to a woman who filled it with pencils and worksheets, and the stubborn belief that children deserve someone who sits with them. She stood in a doorway every evening and watched and said nothing because the work did not need her words, it needed her presence. And she was present every day, without fail, without recognition, without asking for anything in return except that the people around her keep showing up. That was enough. That was everything. Now, I want to be honest with you for a moment. This is a fictional story. The characters are not real. The motel is not real. But the realities this story draws from are not fictional at all. In the United States, nearly 2/3 of minimum wage workers are women. Among single mothers, 1 in 3 works in the service industry, cleaning, cooking, caring for spaces that belong to other people, and in communities across this country, in motels and churches and apartment complex, common rooms, there are people running informal education programs with no funding, no title, and no recognition because they looked at the children around them and decided that the gap between what the system provides and what those children deserve was a gap they were going to fill themselves. I believe the way we treat people in rooms no one is watching says more about us than anything we put on a business card. I believe dignity is not a reward for success. It is a starting point that every human being is owed. And I believe that the Mrs. Thelmas of this world, the ones who show up and hold the seat and say nothing and never ask for credit, are doing some of the most important work there is. Thank you for watching. Before you go, tell us in the comments, have you ever met someone who quietly built something extraordinary in a place the world had written off? We want to hear that story. See you in the next one.